My mother kicked me out for my divorced sister, and I was 8 months pregnant. The cardboard box felt flimsy in my hands, its edges digging into my swollen fingers as I carried it down the porch steps. Inside were all the baby clothes I'd been collecting for months. Tiny onesies, soft blankets, little socks that wouldn't even fit a newborn's feet. My mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her face a mask of cold resolve. Behind her, I could see my sister Natalie, already moving her designer luggage into what used to be my childhood bedroom. I had spent years trying to earn my mother's approval, years trying to prove that I was just as worthy as my older sister. But it had never been enough. It would never be enough. Because in my mother's eyes, Natalie could do no wrong and I could do no right. And now, at 8 months pregnant, with my husband working double shifts just to keep us afloat, I was being thrown out like yesterday's garbage. The irony wasn't lost on me. The first time I realized my mother had a favorite, I was 7 years old. Natalie had just turned 10, and she'd won first place in the school spelling bee. My mother had taken her out for ice cream, had bought her a new dress, had hung her certificate on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a golden star. I'd come home with a perfect report card the same day. Straight A's, glowing comments from every teacher, and my mother had glanced at it, nodded and said, "That's nice, sweetie. Now go wash up for dinner." I'd spent the next 23 years trying to earn that same enthusiastic response. Trying to be good enough, smart enough, successful enough to warrant the kind of love that Natalie received without even trying. I'd aced my SATs, graduated college with honors, landed a job at a respected firm. I'd married a kind, hard-working man named Leo, who treated me with more respect than I'd ever received from my own mother. And when I'd announced my pregnancy, I'd thought, foolishly, naively, that maybe, finally, I would be enough. I was wrong. The trouble started 3 weeks before my due date. Natalie's husband had left her for a younger woman, and she'd shown up at my mother's house with a suitcase and a sob story. I'd been living with my mother temporarily while Leo and I saved for a down payment on our own place. It was supposed to be a short-term arrangement, a few months at most, but the housing market had other plans, and our savings account was growing at a glacial pace. I was in the kitchen, carefully arranging the baby shower gifts I'd received from my coworkers, when my mother walked in with Natalie trailing behind her. My sister's face was blotchy from crying, but I noticed she was still carrying her designer handbag, still wearing her expensive shoes. The same shoes she'd worn to my engagement party, where she'd spent the entire night criticizing my choice of venue. "Rebecca," my mother said, and there was something in her voice that made my stomach clench. "We need to talk." I looked up from the tiny blue blanket I'd been folding. "What's going on?" Natalie let out a dramatic sob, and my mother rushed to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Your sister needs a place to stay. A real place, not just a temporary arrangement. She's going through something terrible, and she needs stability." I set down the blanket, my hands suddenly feeling cold. "Okay, so she can have the guest room. I'll move some of my things around." "That's not going to work," my mother said, her voice firm. "Natalie needs her own space. She needs privacy. She needs to heal." I looked between them, a knot forming in my throat. "What are you saying?" My mother met my eyes, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Something that might have been guilt, might have been hesitation, but it passed quickly, replaced by that familiar mask of determination. "I'm saying you need to find another place to stay. Natalie needs the room. Your room." "Mom, I'm 8 months pregnant," I said, my voice cracking. "I can barely walk up the stairs. Where am I supposed to go?" "You have Leo," she said dismissively. "You can stay with him, or find an apartment. I'm sure you can manage." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and cold. I thought about the hundreds of dollars I'd contributed to household expenses since moving in. I thought about how I'd cooked dinner every night, helped with chores, taking care of my mother when she'd had the flu. I thought about how Natalie had never once offered to help with anything, how she'd always been too busy with her glamorous job and her glamorous husband and her glamorous life. "Mom, please," I whispered. "I don't have anywhere else to go. Leo's apartment is tiny. We can't afford—" "You should have thought about that before you got pregnant," Natalie said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Not everyone gets to make their own choices." The words hit me like a slap. I turned to look at my sister, and I saw the smugness in her eyes, the satisfaction. This was what she'd always wanted, to have me out of the way, to be the center of attention, to prove that she was more important than I could ever be. "I'm leaving in the morning," I said, my voice steady despite the tears burning behind my eyes. "But I want you to know something. This isn't about space. This is about you finally having an excuse to get rid of me. And I really hope, that one day you realize what you've done." My mother didn't say anything. She just stood there, her arms still wrapped around Natalie, her eyes fixed on something in the distance, as if she couldn't bear to look at me. I spent that night packing in silence. Every item I touched seemed to carry a memory. The photograph of my father, who died when I was 12, the bracelet my grandmother had given me on my 16th birthday, the baby blanket my mother had knitted for me, back when I'd still believed she loved me. I folded them carefully into boxes, my swollen belly making the movements awkward and painful. Leo arrived the next morning. He'd taken the day off work when I'd called him, and his face was pale with worry. He took one look at the boxes piled in the living room and let out a low whistle. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice gentle. "We could fight it. We could talk to her." "There's no point," I said, shaking my head. "She's made her decision. She's chosen Natalie. She's always chosen Natalie. Leo's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just started carrying the boxes to the car, his movements careful and deliberate. I watched him from the doorway, feeling the weight of everything I was leaving behind. My mother emerged from the kitchen as I was putting the last box in the trunk. She was holding a container of leftovers, the chicken and rice I'd cooked the night before, now cold and congealed. "Here," she said, thrusting the container into my hands. "You'll need something for the road." I looked at the container, then back at my mother. "Is this supposed to make everything okay?" "It's supposed to be practical," she said, her voice clipped. "You'll be hungry. The baby needs nutrition." The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. After everything she'd done, she was worried about my baby's nutrition, as if that would somehow make up for the weeks of stress, the sleepless nights, the crushing weight of knowing that I'd never be good enough for her. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it as a goodbye. To the house, to the memories, to the last shred of hope I'd been carrying. I got into the car and closed the door. Leo reached over and squeezed my hand, and I felt the tears finally start to fall. "We're going to be okay," he said, his voice steady. "We're going to find a place. We're going to figure this out, together." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had broken inside me, something that would never quite heal. The car pulled away from the curb, and I watched my childhood home shrink in the rearview mirror. My mother was still standing on the porch, and I could see Natalie's silhouette in the window behind her, watching us leave. I didn't look back. Leo's apartment was exactly as I remembered it. Small, cramped, and smelling faintly of the cheap cologne he'd been wearing since college. It was a studio, barely large enough for one person, let alone 2 adults and a newborn. The bed was shoved against one wall, the kitchen counter doubled as a dining table, and the closet was so narrow that I couldn't even fit my maternity clothes inside without folding them into tight, wrinkled bundles. I stood in the middle of the room, my hands pressed against my lower back, trying to ease the ache that had settled there. My feet were swollen, my ankles were practically invisible, and every joint in my body seemed to creak with exhaustion. Leo was carrying in the last box, the one with my grandmother's bracelet and my father's photograph, and I watched him set it down with a gentleness that made my heart ache. "We'll make it work," he said, reading my expression. "I know it's small, but it's only temporary. We'll find something bigger. I've been looking at listings online. There's a 2-bedroom in the next neighborhood that's surprisingly affordable." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that everything would be fine, that we'd find a place, and the baby would come and we'd be a happy little family. But right now, standing in this cramped studio with my belly pressing against the kitchen counter, I felt like I was suffocating. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face, cold and distant, as she told me to leave. I heard Natalie's voice, dripping with smugness. I felt the weight of the boxes in my hands, the shame of being cast out like a stranger. By the 3rd day, I was barely functioning. Leo had gone back to work, and I was alone in the apartment, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. The walls seemed to close in on me, the ceiling pressing down like a weight. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think, I couldn't stop the tears from falling. It was in that moment, in the depths of my despair, that I made a decision. I wasn't going to let my mother and sister win. I wasn't going to let them break me. I had a baby coming. I had a husband who loved me. I had a life to build, and I wasn't going to let their cruelty destroy it. I started making calls. I called friends I hadn't spoken to in months, people I'd drifted away from during my time at my mother's house. I called my old boss, who'd always said I could come back if I needed to. I called a realtor I'd met at a baby shower, who'd mentioned she specialized in helping young families find affordable housing. And slowly, things started to fall into place. A friend from college, Andrea, offered to let us stay in her guest room until we found something permanent. The realtor found a small but livable apartment in a neighborhood I'd never considered. My boss offered me a part-time remote position, starting after the baby was born. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be the life I'd imagined, but it was going to be ours, mine and Leo's and the baby's, and that was enough. The baby came 2 weeks early. I'd been in the middle of sorting through boxes, trying to find a place for everything, which was impossible given the size of Andrea's guest room, when I felt the first contraction. It was like a wave of heat rolling through my body, sharp and unexpected. Leo rushed home from work, and we made it to the hospital just in time. The labor was long and exhausting, but when I finally heard my daughter's first cry, all the pain and fear and anger melted away. The nurse placed her on my chest, and I looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt a love so overwhelming it took my breath away. Her name was Lily, my grandmother's name, the woman who'd loved me unconditionally, who'd told me I was enough even when my mother made me feel like I wasn't. I held Lily close to my chest and made a silent promise. I would never make her feel like she wasn't enough. I would never make her compete for my love. I would never turn my back on her, no matter what. The first visitor I had was Andrea, who came bearing flowers and a onesie that read, "Future CEO." She held Lily with the practiced ease of someone who'd been around babies her whole life, and she smiled at me with genuine warmth. "You're going to be such a good mother," she said. I can already tell. I wanted to believe her, but there was still a small voice in the back of my head, the voice of my mother, telling me I'd never measure up. I pushed it away, focusing on the tiny bundle in my friend's arms. The second visitor I had was my mother. I'd told the hospital staff not to let her in, but somehow she'd convinced them she was there to help. She walked into the room with a bouquet of flowers that looked expensive and forced, her smile painted on like a mask. "Rebecca," she said, her voice soft and cooing. "I came as soon as I heard. Congratulations." I stared at her, my body stiff with tension. "How did you find out?" "Your friend Andrea posted about it on social media," she said, setting the flowers on the windowsill. "I had to come. I had to see my granddaughter." I looked at Lily, who was sleeping peacefully in Andrea's arms. The thought of my mother holding her, of my mother being anywhere near her, made my skin crawl. "Please leave," I said, my voice cold. "I don't want you here." My mother's smile faltered. "Rebecca, I'm your mother. I have every right to be here, to see my granddaughter." "You lost that right when you kicked me out," I said, "when you chose Natalie over me and my unborn child. You don't get to just show up and pretend everything's fine." My mother opened her mouth to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in her eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or regret. Or just the recognition that she'd lost control. "I'll be staying with Andrea for now," I said, "and when I find my own place, you're not going to know where it is. Because I don't want you in my life. Not you, and not Natalie." My mother's face crumpled. "Rebecca, please." "Please what?" I asked, my voice rising. "Please let you pretend you didn't betray me? Please let you act like you've always been the loving, supportive mother you never were? I'm done with that. I'm done with you." The room fell silent. Andrea shifted uncomfortably, her arms tightening around Lily. My mother stood frozen by the window, the flowers in her hands trembling. "I love you," my mother said finally, her voice cracking. "I know I've made mistakes, but I love you." "No, you don't," I said quietly. "You love the idea of me. You love what I could have been, if I'd only been more like Natalie. But you don't love who I actually am, and I've spent my whole life trying to earn a love that was never going to be given freely. I'm done with that now." My mother left without another word. I watched her go, and I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me, like a weight I'd been carrying my whole life had finally been lifted. Andrea handed me Lily, and I held her close, breathing in the sweet baby smell of her. She stirred in my arms, her tiny fingers curling around my thumb, and I smiled. "You're going to be so loved," I whispered. "I promise you that." The first 2 months of motherhood were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and moments of such overwhelming love that I thought my heart might burst. Lily was a dream. She slept well, ate well, and had a smile that could light up any room. She was also, as I discovered, fiercely independent. She had my stubbornness and Leo's determination, and I could already tell she was going to be a force of nature. Andrea was a lifesaver, as I'd known she would be. She held Lily at 3 in the morning when Leo was too exhausted to get up. She cooked meals I didn't have to think about. She listened to me cry when the exhaustion and stress became too much. She never judged, never criticized, never made me feel like I wasn't doing enough. "We're going to make it," she said one night as we sat on her couch watching Lily sleep in her bassinet. "We've got this." I nodded, but I couldn't quite bring myself to believe it. The weight of my mother's rejection still clung to me like a shadow. Every time I looked at Lily, I wondered if I was worthy of her. Every time I held her, I worried I was going to mess up. It was a constant nagging voice in the back of my head, telling me I wasn't enough. I was on maternity leave for 3 months, and I spent every moment of it with Lily. We bonded in ways I'd never imagined possible. I learned the way her face crumpled when she was about to cry. I learned the way her tiny fingers curled around my thumb. I learned the way she smiled when she saw me, that gummy, toothless grin that made my heart skip a beat. When I returned to work part-time, I felt a pang of guilt. I'd been with her every day for months, and leaving her with a sitter, even a trusted one that Andrea had recommended, felt like a betrayal. But I knew I had to do it. We needed the money, and I needed to feel like myself again. The job was remote, which made things easier. I worked from Andrea's guest room, Lily napping in her bassinet beside my desk. I took calls with her in my arms. I responded to emails while she nursed. It was exhausting, but it was also fulfilling. And then the first card arrived. It was a week before my birthday, and I'd just put Lily down for her afternoon nap when I found it on the doorstep. It was a simple white envelope, no return address, addressed to me in handwriting I recognized immediately, my mother's handwriting. I stood on the porch staring at the envelope, my hand trembling. I'd had no contact with my mother since the hospital, and I'd been careful to keep my location a secret. How had she found me? I opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside was a birthday card, cheap and generic, with a picture of flowers on the front. The message inside was short. "I miss you. I miss my granddaughter. Please call me." I stared at the words for a long time, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to throw the card away, to pretend I'd never seen it. Part of me wanted to call her, to hear her voice, to feel like I had a mother again. But I didn't call. I couldn't. Not yet. The second card came a few days later. This one was addressed to Lily, though it was in the same handwriting as the first. "Happy first month, little one. I hope you know how much your grandmother loves you. I'm so sorry I can't be there. Please ask your mommy to call me." I stared at the card, My emotions warring. The audacity of it. The assumption that she had any right to my daughter. The guilt trip disguised as a gesture of love. I wanted to rip it up, to toss it in the trash. Instead, I put it in a box with the first card and shoved it in the back of my closet. I was still processing the cards when Natalie showed up. She appeared at my front door one afternoon, looking as polished as ever. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her clothes expensive. She looked like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover, not like someone who was going through a divorce. "Rebecca," she said, her voice sweet and insincere. "I've been trying to reach you." I stood in the doorway, blocking her entry. "What do you want?" "I want to talk," she said. "I want to apologize for everything." I stared at her, searching for any sign of sincerity, but all I saw was the same smugness I'd seen my whole life, the same self-satisfaction, the same belief that she could get whatever she wanted with a smile and a few well-chosen words. "Apologize for what?" I asked. "For taking my room? For getting me kicked out? For telling me I shouldn't have gotten pregnant?" Natalie's smile faltered. "That was a terrible thing to say. I was going through something terrible. I wasn't thinking straight." "You're always going through something terrible," I said, "and somehow I'm always the one who pays the price." Natalie opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't want to hear your apologies. I don't want you in my life, and I don't want you anywhere near my daughter. Do you understand?" Natalie's face hardened. "You're making a mistake. You're going to regret this." "No," I said. "I'm finally doing something right." I closed the door in her face and leaned against it, my heart pounding. Lily was still sleeping, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding around her. I went to her bassinet and watched her sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. I wasn't going to let my mother and sister manipulate me anymore. I wasn't going to let them make me feel like I wasn't enough. I was enough. I had always been enough. And now I had Lily to prove it to. The months that followed were hard. Leo and I found our own place. A small but cozy 2-bedroom in a neighborhood with a good school system. Andrea stayed close, becoming Lily's honorary aunt and my closest confidant. And slowly, we built a life for ourselves. My mother continued to send cards. They came on holidays, on birthdays, on random days with no significance at all. I never read them. I put them in the box in the back of my closet, alongside the guilt and the anger and the hope I still couldn't quite let go of. A year after Lily was born, I got a call from a lawyer. My mother's a state lawyer. My mother had passed away unexpectedly, a heart attack in her sleep, and she'd left me something in her will. I sat in the lawyer's office, Lily in my arms, and listened as he read the will. My mother had left me her house, the house I'd grown up in, the house she'd kicked me out of. Natalie had been given a small cash settlement. "She wanted you to have it," the lawyer said, his voice gentle. "She wanted you to have a home for you and your daughter." I stared at the papers in front of me, my eyes burning with tears. I hadn't cried at the news of my mother's death. I hadn't been able to. But now, sitting here with Lily in my arms, the tears came. I didn't take the house. I didn't want it. I didn't want the memories. I sold it and used the money to start a college fund for Lily, because she was going to have everything I never did. She was going to have a mother who loved her unconditionally, a mother who put her first, a mother who never made her feel like she wasn't enough. And the cards, the ones I'd never read, I burned them, every single one. I watched them turn to ash, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, because this was my life now, my family, my story, and I was going to write it the way I wanted.